What's up everyone? In this video we'll be answering the questions that were asked recently after my thru hike of the Appalachian Trail was completed. I got a lot of good questions front and back on here. I think I'm going to chop this video into two parts so it's not like an hour long or anything. So we'll get right down to it. Who was my cell service with? I was using Verizon out on the trail. I think Verizon was the best carrier out there. I had heard that in the years that I'd been planning up to this, and I had Sprint prior, so I purposely switched from Sprint to Verizon. I feel like coverage area-wise, Sprint was the worst service provider. There was other people out there that had AT&T, and AT&T worked probably second best, but Verizon was the best, it seemed like, on average throughout the whole trail. There was a section in Virginia where I think I had no service for like 3 days, somewhere in the middle of the state. And then even further north through like the 100-mile wilderness and stuff, I had decent cell service with Verizon, some of the mountain peaks and even at the top of Katahdin. Was your battery bank sufficient for this trip? Did you run out of power at any time, including the possibility in the 100-mile wilderness? I took a Anchor battery bank, 15,000 milliamp hours, and I think that was the perfect size for everything that I needed. I did have extra electronics compared to the average person. Most people were just using their phone, and just having it off in airplane mode saves a lot of your phone battery power. But I was using the phone, the rechargeable headlamp, and the camera that I was using to film, and I found that the 15,000 would last me 5 days or so was the average longest stretch that I had to conserve the battery power for. There was once or twice, I think, where I was running low on battery and I was able to conserve it long enough to use what I needed. So 15,000 worked just fine. If you only have your phone out there in the woods, I think you don't need to go any bigger than like a 10,000 milliamp hour battery backup. Did I have a good start date? In hindsight, would I have changed it at all? The reason this person is asking is they're looking to start at the end of January or early February time frame, and my thoughts on those. So my start date was April 20th, and I kind of got forced into that date. I retired from the military on April 1st, and after doing all the post-processing stuff that I needed to, the absolutely earliest I could have gotten on the trail was April 20th. I feel like that was a pretty good start date, but I also felt rushed throughout the thru hike, trying to get all the way to Maine before the winter started setting in. So I didn't like the rushed feeling that I had. So if I had a choice, I would have started earlier. I think April 1st is a pretty good start date. There are a lot more people starting in January and February time frame, and that does help spread out the crowds as everybody's starting all at the same time in the early spring. But me personally, I hate the cold, so I think January and February is too early. That's too early for me. You're definitely going to be walking through snow and ice, and those trails are kind of rough enough. You don't want to be walking through ice. But if you are kind of forced into your start date and you have to start early, I would definitely have like crampons on your shoes, warmer sleeping bags, and stuff like that. But just know that even though you're starting in Georgia, you are going to be walking in snow and ice. What was my body weight at the start and end? So I've always been a small, skinny guy. I averaged like 120 pounds body weight for like the last 30 years, and that was my weight when I started the trail. I think I only weighed myself once the entire trip, and I was down to 110 pounds, and I think that's where I had stabilized at throughout the whole trip. I definitely lost like an inch off of my waist, and I had to hem up my pants at one point just to keep them from slipping down. And then I feel like within a week or so after coming back home, getting off the trail, I still had the hiker hunger appetite, and I filled out just fine back to my normal 120 pounds weight, and that's what I weigh right now, 120 pounds, so I'm fine as it is. Would you have done anything different in hindsight as it relates to food? I don't think so. On average, I ate healthier than the average hiker, I would say. Eating healthier on the trail, I think, comes down to it's kind of difficult because sometimes your resupplies are like at a gas station in the middle of nowhere and you're kind of stuck with whatever supplies they have on hand. You're very weight conscious, so you have to have the lighter foods, and a lot of the better trail foods like the Kind bars and protein bars and stuff like that are going to be more on the expensive side. So you also have to have the savings saved up to be able to do the more expensive resupplies. I think I was able to pull stuff like that off better than more other people. A lot of people were just eating ramen and stuff like that. I saw a lot of people going for the high sugary honey buns and stuff like that. They've got the high calories, but it's a lot of sugars and not necessarily the right amounts of protein and stuff. So it's kind of funny, and overall I think I was healthier on average. It is also possible to do the trail vegetarian, I think, but that's going to be even more difficult if those are your nutritional needs. As it relates to your videos, would you do anything different, and if so, what? I don't think so. The way I did the videos, I think, was more challenging compared to the average vlogger. Most people would just use their phone. The problem with that is you have to delete your videos as you go, so you don't have a master copy backup, and the video quality for most people that were just using their phones was lower than the video quality that I was going for. I liked having the separate designated camera, and I was able to use the external hard drive that I have, and I would save a master copy of each episode in the highest quality that I could have, and the average file size for those was about like 15 gigabytes or so. And then even the version I uploaded to YouTube was just a standard def, and it was at least 4 gigabytes per episode. So I had more challenges with trying to get those uploaded throughout the trail, but overall I think I pulled it off. There was only kind of one break in the videos, which only lasted about a week or so. But I'm satisfied with the end result, and hopefully you guys are too. What was your total cost, and what was your equipment list? As far as the equipment, I have 2 videos out, one at the start of the trail with all my equipment, and one at the end of the trail that I just published as a post-gear review. Check out those videos on my website, and you'll see that a lot of the gear was actually the same from what I started with. I never had any real gear malfunctions or was too tired or upset with the gear choices that I made. I spent the 5 years or so before the trail doing a lot of research and study, so most of the gear that I started with I was actually happy with and finished with that same gear. As far as total costs, this is a good one. Gear can vary depending on the quality and the weight of the gear that you're going for. I'd known I wanted to do the trail for about 5 years before starting it, so I was able to save up money and also get gear over time, so I didn't have to throw all the money at it at one lump sum, which makes it easier to spread the money out that way. I would say $2,000 to $3,000 worth of gear or so. I've got more of the expensive Dyneema Z-Packs tent, a down sleeping bag is going to be expensive, and all that kind of stuff. Just collecting that over time. So I would say $2,000 to $3,000 worth of gear, and then they say throughout the thru hike it's going to cost you about $1,000 a month, and I think that's a pretty good estimate to go for when you're trying to budget yourself. There are people that do it more on the cheap side. I think it might be possible to do the trail on a $500 a month budget, maybe at the cheapest. I would say my expenses ranged more on the higher average size. I had more expensive resupply runs and more expensive hotel stays. So I think my expenses were closer to $1,200 to $1,500 a month, but I never really tracked it that tightly. I just had a lump of money saved up, and I never really budgeted for the trail, and I just figured it's going to cost whatever it costs, and if I had to eat an expensive dinner someplace, I didn't worry about it. If I had to do a really expensive resupply run somewhere, I didn't really worry about it. So it's definitely easier when you've got the money saved up. But just realize this is a really expensive endeavor as well as a physically challenging one. Was it a deliberate choice not to get involved in a tramily, or was it just something that never happened for you? I would say it more just kind of never happened for me. I kind of saw that it would be challenging, I think, to be in a group of 6 to 8 people. Everybody's got to be on the same wavelength for the same hiking pace. Everybody's got to be in the same mindset and not getting on each other's nerves, which I think is moderately easy to do because most people on the trail are pretty cool anyway. And I think some of their challenges would be if someone wants to take a 0 somewhere, maybe everybody's got to take a 0, or if someone wants to push, you know, a bunch of 20-mile days back to back, then does everybody push 20-mile days back to back? So I think it would be harder in a bigger group for everybody to be on the same pace and mindset. It seems like a lot of times, naturally, more people were in groups of 2 to 3 or so that I could see. And that's kind of where I fell in a little bit too. A lot of times I would just hike by myself, but for weeks on end, I would merge with at least one other person, maybe 2 other people, and we would be together for a while, not necessarily maybe hiking together directly, but we would end up at the same shelters a lot or at the same hostels, and I think that was fine. But I'm more of kind of the quiet introvert, and I didn't mind hiking by myself at all. In Virginia, you said it was the worst part of the trail, then in northern Pennsylvania was the worst part. Now that I'm finished, what really was the worst part of the trail? So Virginia really beat my feet up, and I think that came down to the type of shoes I had. They had a lot of small rocks on the trail, like the size of your fist to the size of your head, and they were all at odd angles and sharp, so you could never plant your feet straight down. Your feet were always constantly at weird angles, and beating up your ankles would get sore and stuff like that. So I would say Virginia was a very rough state to walk through. Northern Pennsylvania was very rough to go through. I think as far as the worst, most rough area was probably in New Hampshire, going through the start of the White Mountains. Kinsman, North and South Kinsman was especially really difficult. And then once you finish the White Mountains, you have to do the Wildcat Mountains, and those were also really, really rough. So that's probably one of the worst areas physically. You're just going straight up rock walls and straight down rock walls. Also, what was the easiest section? There were parts in Virginia, I think, like I especially loved the Roan Highlands. It was a very easy, lovely area. Just kind of go over these large rolling hills. And I especially loved the 100-mile wilderness. Was also just a beautiful, easy section that I wish I could have done slower. Lastly, which section was the most fun? Well, they say the Mahoosic Notch is the funnest mile. I would partially agree with that. It was kind of fun. If it was shorter, it would have been a lot more enjoyable, I think, but once you're kind of halfway through it, you're just ready for it to be over with. But, and the most fun, again, I guess the 100-mile wilderness. I just thoroughly enjoyed that area. That was just beautiful scenery and just awesome to walk through. Last part of this question, if somebody only had a weekend to hike one section, what would you recommend? Definitely in Virginia had a lot of cool areas like the Roan Highlands or the Grayson Highlands. Those were awesome. Southern Pennsylvania was also a top-tier area that I absolutely loved. That had more of the Americana farmland type feel to it, which was just as cool. And if you can do the 100-mile wilderness and get up there, just logistically, it might be hard to tackle that whole thing in one stretch. You're going to have to push the 15 to 20-mile days just to get through it. But the 100-mile wilderness was awesome if you're up that far north. Are you going to make a consolidated start to finish where you basically speed through the whole thing, just pausing for a really useful tip or good view? I think this is in reference to doing like a consolidated documentary style video where it's like an hour long or something and kind of encompasses the whole trail in one video. I could do that. It is possible. I have all the original clips saved on all my SD cards. I don't see myself doing that. That would be a really time-consuming, large endeavor. As cool as kind of a project that would be, I just don't see myself doing that. That would take hours and hours and hours and hours of trolling through all the clips that I had, hundreds of hours of video, and finding the best pieces of each one and then editing it all together. It would just be a massive undertaking of a project. So as of right now, I would say no. I don't see myself doing that, but you never know. I may get bored one day and just spend a whole month crunching that out, but that would be a huge project. Do you have any regrets about your hike, such as wishing you would have taken a blue blaze here or there, staying at a particular hostel, or wishing you had a particular piece of equipment with you? Is there anything you would do differently if you could turn back time? There were a lot of really cool blue blazes. I wanted to stick to the trail and knock out the trail itself, because that's what I was there for. I was there to do the Appalachian Trail. One of the coolest blue blazes I think I would have loved to do is through the Shenandoahs. There's an aqua blaze where you can get in a canoe and travel through the Shanties in up rivers and stuff. I don't know exactly where or how logistically that's accomplished. I just know of it, and I heard a lot of people talking about it, and a lot of people were doing that. I felt like that would have, if I would have done that, I would have had to hike the whole trail through the Shanties and then kind of backtracked and then done the aqua blaze through there. So that would have just added another week or so. But it sounded like a really cool trip, just a multi-day canoe trip up through that section. It just sounded awesome. So I just kind of kept that in the back of my mind as something to come back and do for a later time. I may, at some point, try to get there and do that, but there were a couple of cool opportunities like that where you could do these blue blaze side trails. Staying at a particular hostel, there were a lot of really cool hostels, and unless you're doing like 5 miles a day, there were sections where you just couldn't stay at all of them. So I kept kind of in the back of my mind some of those cooler hostels that sounded really nice. Other people that had stayed at some. kind of like Bear Garden, I think, was one in Virginia that I kind of missed and would like to stay there, but it was kind of funny. I was always kind of joking where I'm just going to have to come back and hike the AT again and hit up all these other places that I missed. But there were a lot of cool hostels and opportunities. I highly recommend staying at the hostels because you got to get that part of the experience of the trail itself. But there's just too many to name and too many to count of those type of things that I missed. But yeah, I wish I could have stayed at all the cool hostels that I had missed along the way. As far as any pieces of equipment I wish I had, I think the only one I can think of off the top of my head was my little folding camp chair. It weighs a pound, so it was kind of too heavy to take. But that was the one piece of equipment I was debating at the last minute whether I should take it or whether I should leave it. I'm kind of glad I left it because I think it would be too heavy, but if I had taken it, I would have used it every day. I would have loved having a little camp chair. I just think it's too heavy, but I think that's the only piece of equipment I can think of. Anything I would do differently if I turned back time? I don't think so. I think I liked what I accomplished through the hike, and I think that turned out overall just the way I wanted it to. Were the regular campground spots all sold out at Katahdin Stream Campground? Could you have stayed there had you chosen, rather than hiking from A-Ball Bridge? I didn't even look into that. I expected it to be fully overcrowded, and I couldn't really tell once I was there. It looked like most of the spots were all reserved, but I would have had to book it maybe weeks in advance, and you never really know exactly what your summit date is until you're getting much closer to the actual summit. So logistically, it would have made everything more difficult if I had locked in my summit date, 2 weeks in advance. Overall, I think it turned out well. I was definitely more of a non-standard way of doing the summit because I had access to a car and trying to get the car into the park. Most people found success just hiking into A-Ball Bridge area. You can stay at campgrounds there. And then the next day, meeting at the kiosk at the entrance to Baxter State Park, waiting for the ranger to show up, getting yourself on the list, and then trying to stay at the Birches inside Baxter, doing the 10-mile hike that day to the Birches, staying the night there, and then doing the summit the next day. That seemed to work out pretty well for most people that were trying to do that. So you could stay at Katahdin Stream Campground itself. There would be fees and stuff associated with that. If you stay at the Birches, it's specifically for thru hikers only. It's just limited space, but you don't have to pay if you stay at the Birches. So that seemed like the best way to do it. Break down the approximate days you spent in a tent, shelter, hostels, etc. I actually did keep track of that, just kind of for fun. So on my phone in the Notes app, I was tracking some of the statistics, so here's what I've got. So I started on April 20th, finished on September 22nd, for a total of 156 days on trail. Of that, I slept in a tent 39 nights, stayed in a shelter for 63, stayed at a hotel or a motel for 25. I had 20 hostel stays. I stayed in an RV once. That was when my dad came to meet me at the start of the Shenandoah hike section. I stayed in 6 people's houses. I stayed in one of the AMC huts. I took 17 zeros. I had to dig 23 cat holes. I saw 10 bears, 2 rattlesnakes, and 1 tick. I'm surprised I only had 1 tick. The East Coast is notorious for being completely tick infested, so I think I got off pretty lucky and no Lyme disease. And I saw 1 moose, which is pretty cool. Never saw a porcupine though, which I wanted to see. And I had 12 encounters of trail magic. So this trail magic number only accounted for when somebody was actually there with their setup and had all their food and stuff, and they were hanging out all day, giving it out to the hikers directly. So of that type of trail magic, there was 12, even though there was much more encounters of trail magic where there was maybe a random cooler or something along the way. Overall, were the shelters really that bad with rodents? Yes and no. The whole first half of the trail is very mice infested in all the shelters. Luckily, they left me alone. There were people that had food bags eaten into. They would get into chewing holes in your pockets and stuff on your backpacks, or try to rip the stuffing out of your sleeping bags. I think the worst, more common with the mice encounters would be them crawling over top of you while you're sleeping and you just kind of feel something and bat them off. A lot of people don't like that and would sleep in their tents and hammocks and stuff, but I never had a problem with the mice. They left me alone throughout the whole thing. I think I just got lucky in that regard, but yeah, all the southern shelters were heavily mice infested. Once you get further north past the Mason-Dixon line, I kind of noticed I saw less and less of the mice. I think they were still there, they just weren't out and about for some reason. And then once I got like into Maine, I noticed it was all chipmunks. A lot of chipmunks and stuff hanging around the shelters. I was wondering if more people would just feed them because they look cute, but the chipmunks would leave me alone. They were just not shy, and they would crawl up and in and around all the shelters. This question's coming from somebody who's starting the AT in 2024. They've been dreaming of it since they were 8 years old. What tips or advice would you have for hitting the AT? What's cool is when you know or kind of are stuck in a job or something where you can't really get out for a couple of years, but you've got the time to plan. I think that's good when you've got the time to sit there and think about what you're doing. There seems like there's a lot of people that decide at the last second to go hike the trail, and they jump on trail with not a lot of backpacking experience or planning that they've done, and they have a lot rougher time of it. So if you've got the time to plan, you can start gathering your gear. I would recommend getting on YouTube and watching everybody else's through hikes. You get a really good idea of what the trail is like and expectations, the really rough areas, the easier sections, and what types of gear you might need. The better times of season to start. I would not recommend starting super early like in January or February, but that's just my opinion because I hate the cold. I would not want to walk through the ice and snow. I think the time frame that I did it was pretty good. I would have gone a little bit earlier. You'd be able to get into Damascus for trail days and stuff like that, and you wouldn't feel as rushed for trying to get all the way up north before the snow started setting in. But the trail would be more crowded if you're in that peak period between like mid-March to mid-April. The trail is going to be the most crowded. So you take the pluses and the minuses. Once you've got your gear all collected and figured out what works for you, I would suggest also getting out and doing as many practice hikes as you can. If you happen to live close to the East Coast and can actually physically get on the AT itself, get some practice hikes in. Just pick random areas. You've got to experience the rough areas and the easy areas. A little bit in the north, a little bit in the south. Just kind of get out as much as you can and practice. Did you lose any weight? Yeah, like I said before, I started at 120 pounds. I lost 10 pounds and maintained 110 throughout the whole hike. And then within a week after getting back, I'm back up to my normal weight of 120. What happens to the beard? Yeah, the beard's gone. What's funny is being in the military, I was never able to have a beard, so it was nice experiencing what it's like to have a beard, but I found it being too much of a bother. It would get in the way when I ate. It never really felt like it was clean. It just felt dirty, and it got in the way. So I got rid of it as soon as I got back. Any other future hikes, I'm definitely going to let it grow again. I think it makes a cool record of your time kind of out in the trail, letting your beard grow out. So in that respect, I'll keep it once I continue hiking, but once I get back home, I'll keep shaving it probably. If you had to through hike the AT again, what would you do differently? Earlier start date, like I mentioned, I think. Have you eaten a lot of green stuff after finishing the hike? Yep, I'm back to a normal diet. No more overloading with candy bars and that kind of thing. It definitely takes a week after, I think, for the hiker hunger to go back to normal. And your body just lets you know when you're full again, and you can kind of slow down your eating habits. So for me, it wasn't too hard to keep my weight under control, I guess, for the most part. I'm back to kind of the healthy, normal average weight, as I usually always am. So I'm going to end this video here. That was a good group of questions, and we'll tackle part 2 in another video that'll come out here soon. If you have more questions, go ahead and keep asking them in these videos, and I'll try to respond as much as I can to any of the questions. So thanks for watching, and we'll catch you guys in the next Q&A video to be coming out here shortly.